The ultimate skill that every beginner dressmaker or sewist must possess is the ability to create a professionally finished garment. Sewing is not just about creating clothes. It's about establishing longevity in our everyday wardrobe. And the best possible way to achieve that is none other than by finishing seams properly. The hallmark of a well-made garment is not seen from the outside, but rather from the inside, as it will determine how long your clothes will last. Join me today as we explore 5 of my favorite seam finishing techniques. One can simply remember that seam finishing is an essential part of a garment or accessory construction. In the early times, dressmaking and seam finishing is mostly done by hand, and garments takes days or even months to get finished. But thanks to today's modern day technology, we are able to create a garment by just one sitting. All with the help, of course, with the undisputed modern day sewing machines. Today's featured sewing machine, the Brother FS60X, one of my prized possessions. One should simply understand that you don't need a serger or an overlocker machine to fully create a garment, and that the Brother FS60X is capable of doing that. And if you're still wondering what this sewing machine can do, check out and click the link below for a closer look of the Brother FS60X. It's Julius again, and thank you for joining me as we explore top 5 of my favorite seam finishing techniques on the Brother FS60X. The very first on the list is none other than the overcast stitch. This can simply be done on the FS60X as it comes with a special foot called the overcast foot. Also known as over-edge foot, which gives you an edging similar to that of an overlocker machine. And it simply clips on and off on your machine and you're ready to go. To finish seams with an overcast edge, begin by overcasting both raw edges of the fabric pieces to be sewn. Switch to the overcast stitching on the machine, then place the fabric with the edge aligned with the metal bar found on the foot. Begin sewing as you would until the edges are sewn. This will look like it's done using an overlocker machine. Then proceed in sewing the fabric pieces right sides together with your desired seam allowance using your regular presser foot. The final step is to press open the seams for that professional look. So this finish adds a step more, but will definitely give you your time's worth. And the best part is, it looks like it was done on a serger or an overlocker. Next on the list is also my favorite, the flat felled seam. The flat felled seam is one of the strongest seams out there. Using your regular presser foot, sew both fabric pieces together. Once sewn, press open the seams and trim one side of the seam allowance. The other seam allowance will be folded in half towards the other seam to cover it, pressing as you fold. The folded edge will then be edge stitched in place with a straight stitch. This will create 2 rows of stitching, each one visible on both sides. The flat felt seam can be done either on the inside or the outside of the garment. It all depends on what look you're trying to achieve. And this seam finishing technique is often found in menswear, as they undergo a lot of wear and tear. These are commonly found on men's shirts, pants, jeans, or jackets. And this seam is proven to be one of the most strongest seams out there. Third on the list is the fancy French seam. It is done by stitching the seam allowance twice and is most commonly done on sheer fabrics, so they blend well with the fabric itself. I wouldn't recommend doing a French seam on thicker fabrics as it creates bulk, but they're great for items that will be washed repeatedly, like your pillowcases. To do this, pin your fabric pieces wrong sides together first. Sew or stitch about half of the original seam allowance. This is a very important step to remember. If the intended seam allowance is an inch, then the first stitching will be made by sewing half an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Once done, press and trim the seam allowance to about 1/8 of an inch. Next is to sew the French seams by pinning the fabric right sides together and sewing the remaining ½ inches seam allowance. Give it a final press for a professional looking finish. Now that's very easy if I say so myself. On to the next technique. It's a simple one and is very similar to the overcast stitch, but way easier than the French seam. This is done using the zigzag stitch on your machine. To create the zigzag finish, start by sewing zigzag stitches along both edges of the fabric pieces to be sewn. Keeping the default zigzag width and length will be just fine, but may be adjusted as desired. Once done, pin the pieces right sides together and sew the desired seam allowance using a straight stitch. Press open the seams and trim the excess seam allowance close to the zigzag stitching, being careful not to cut through. This technique is great if you have a machine that didn't come with an overcast foot or doesn't have an overcast stitch. The last and final seam finishing technique I'm going to show you is a little bit fancy, all with the help of bias tapes. Bias tapes can either be bought pre-made or can be made by making strips of fabric that were cut on the bias grain. To do this, start by unfolding one edge of the bias tape and pin it along the fabric edge. The edge of the tape should line up with the raw edge of the fabric. Sew along the fold line using a straight stitch. Once done, fold the binding to the other side of the fabric without opening up the fold. The tape should just cover the first line of stitching done. Pin the folded bias tape to secure and edge stitch in place. This will be done on both fabric pieces. Once the bias binding is sewn, proceed in sewing the two pieces of fabric right sides together using a straight stitch. Press open the seam allowance as usual and you're done. And there we have it. 5 of my favorite seam finishing techniques. They are all easy to make and does not require the help of a serger or an overlocker. The FS60X is a great machine to have, and didn't I mention this before? It's extra tough, which means you can sew even the thickest fabrics you can find. So thank you once again for joining me, and I will see you right here once again with another sewing project. Ciao! I'm looking at my curtains right now. Let's see what we can make of it.